Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. Quick reminder, support the transmission, the podcast. Best way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack, a little over $9 a month or a little over $90 a year. We do private group Zoom chats, calls every week or two just to shoot the breeze on what's going on. And in many ways, it's sort of a conspiracy group therapy session. I also do a weekly roundup of all the news, the best headlines, and the commentary, which people are very much enjoying and finding valuable. And sometimes we bring back past podcast guests for a live Q&A with supporters, members only. And so again, that's the best way to support me. You can also buy me a coffee, send some funds through DonorBox, Wise, or crypto, Bitcoin. I could use some Bitcoin right now. You could also purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about anything, and do check out all of my affiliates, easydns.com, Legal Shield, Escape the Technocracy, Wise Wolf Gold, Above Phone. There's maybe a few others. And my newest one is Societatis Civis. That's a fellow Croat out in Australia who has developed a series of apps to help people obtain second or third citizenships. So far, he's got, for if you are of heritage that is Croatian, Polish, or Italian, you can use his apps to look into getting becoming naturalized. And he's got other countries in the pipe. I think Argentina and perhaps a few others. So check that out and leave a podcast review if you haven't already. Joining us for the first time on Geopolitics and Empire is Peter Duke of the Duke Report. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Peter.
Nice to be here. Hervoye. I got it. Hervoye. I'm just going to call you a yay, like Kanye.
Yeah, this is the first time I heard anyone say that. I could just shorten my name to Ye, like Kanye, and that's pretty hilarious, pretty funny. And we were chatting before we hit record. I got familiar with your work in recent history. I'm very much enjoying it, and it's difficult because there's so many podcasters, content creators, bloggers, substackers out there, and I earnestly try. I'm kind of like a nerd in that sense, librarian, where I bookmark so many of the folks, and I want to have the lay of the land. And you've got a fascinating backstory. So before getting your sort of big picture view on what's going on, if you want to tell us a bit about yourself, your background experience, and your line of research.
Well, thanks for having me today. First of all, it's an honor because I think that there is a lot of noise out in the world, and the podcast space does really wind up getting complicated, and people find themselves going off into rabbit holes, and it's a difficult thing to kind of keep your focus on things. So I appreciate your channel a lot, and I've noticed since I've kind of moved over to Substack that the quality of the conversation is much better than on other platforms that I've been on. But long story short, I was a computer science major in college. My father was a doctor. He taught me how to use a camera. My mother was a librarian at Rand before I was born, her and her twin sister. So there's some kind of like twin Rand thing going on there. That's kind of weird. But when I was growing up, my next door neighbor was a mathematician at Rand. I learned how to play board games when I was 10 or 11 years old. So I was into kind of game theory very young. I went on. I became I went to UC Santa Barbara. I was a computer science major. I dropped out of school because I wanted to be a photographer. My father was also a photographer. He was a doctor who did photography as a hobby, and it broke his heart when I told him I wanted to be a photographer. But I did that, and I did that for quite a while. But I had computer experience on the ARPANET at UC Santa Barbara. And so when the World Wide Web started to happen, people started asking me questions that I had the answers to. And I transitioned from being a photographer to being a creative director in technology, meaning that I built all of the first generation websites for 20th Century Fox. So I worked for News Corp for Rupert Murdoch, and built the xfiles.com and foxsports.com. And this was before Fox News. Then I left News Corp and worked with Max Kaiser for a while on something called the Hollywood Stock Exchange, and we invented, which ostensibly was the first cryptocurrency, which was the Hollywood dollar. Then I went on, I worked for Steven Spielberg. I designed video games at a place called Sega GameWorks. and ran all of their kind of internet operations. And then I went on to Virgin, and I ran e-commerce at Virgin. And along the way, somebody from Spielberg's operation called me up and asked me to help them design the online education system for the SHOAH Foundation Institute, which is Spielberg's Holocaust organization. So I have this kind of unique point of view about things. And in 2010, I met Andrew Breitbart, and he was talking about how politics was downstream from culture. And I thought, well, I used to use a camera. I hadn't really picked up a camera in decades. And I thought that I would simply just start taking pictures. I noticed that the people who were saying the things that I more or less agreed with were not being portrayed well in the media. And I thought that I could do that. I thought that I could reach out to these people and let them know that I could help them fix their image. And little did I know when I did that, it was like grabbing a third rail, because I shot pictures of Chuck Johnson is who I started with, and then Scott Adams, and then Mike Cernovich, and then Baked Alaska, who are just people that I kind of casually had met. And the New York Times Magazine sent somebody out to write a hit piece on me. And they wound up framing me as the Annie Leibovitz of the alt-right. Which I found pretty. The first time I saw it, I kind of laughed out loud, because I thought Annie Leibovitz has worked a long time to become Annie Leibovitz, and I've taken 4 pictures, and now they're equating me with her career. So it was kind of laughable at that point. But then I had a series of reporters calling me up and asking me questions, and the question that they kept asking me is, "Are you alt-right?" And again, I didn't know enough about journalism. I didn't understand that journalism is actually like kindergarten for intelligence agencies. Like, if you want to be a spook, there's a couple of different disciplines that you go into, but journalism is one of them, because it's a job where you're allowed to call up people and ask them uncomfortable questions. And so I asked each one of the reporters the same question. I said, "You define for me what alt-right means, and I will tell you whether or not that's what I believe." And what I didn't understand at that moment was that I was applying critical thinking skills by simply trying to reframe whatever it is that, or understand the frame that they were trying to put me in. And so that was kind of an awakening. That led me, like I said, I met a guy named Chuck Johnson. It's a very interesting character. He was my business partner for 4 years. We did 3 different websites. One was a journalism startup called GotNews, and it was a news website where we broke stories that nobody else had. I didn't exactly understand where the information was coming that we were breaking. Eventually, I figured it out, that it was coming from intelligence agencies. And then we started we did 2 different startups. One was called WeSearchr. And the idea was that when Hillary Clinton's emails came out, the story about her emails being missing, because I had this background in computer science, and because I had years of running the operations for companies like Virgin and GameWorks and News Corp, I understood that her mail was not gone. Like, one server does not make your email gone. And so we started talking, and I said, we should just do what they did in the Wild West. Like, we should put up wanted posters. And so we turned that into a business. Turned out Peter Thiel thought that was an interesting idea and wrote a check for $250,000 without a deal memo. And that's when I started to learn how the financing of things in Silicon Valley really starts to work. You hear all these stories, like Jeff Bezos says, "Oh, I had 1,000 meetings before I raised any money on Amazon." It's like, I just don't believe any of that stuff anymore, because I saw in real time, in real life, how this happened. And we built WeSearchr, and we generated $1 million in revenue in the first year. And basically the idea was people could put their credit cards, they could basically make a promise to pay a bounty if we come up with the evidence. So and there were some problems with the way that the thing was implemented. I had disagreements with the CTO on that project, but we did generate $1 million in revenue. We did wind up paying out some bounties. I can't remember exactly what the stories were that we broke, but then we got deplatformed because we were using PayPal to take money. And there was a blow up with the CTO, and which I kind of saw as an advantage because I had enough technology management experience that I thought I could do it myself. And so we rebuilt. We made a deal with the Collison brothers at Stripe, who promised that they would not deplatform us. And then we built a second version of it that was basically a combination of GoFundMe, Kickstarter, and there was one other one, maybe like Buy Me a Coffee. I can't remember what the three, but basically we had 3 different models. And again, it worked flawlessly. We ran the thing for about a year. We generated over $1 million in revenue, and then Stripe deplatformed us. And when we talked to the Collison brothers to find out why they went back on their promise, they said that Wells Fargo told them that if they didn't get rid of us, that Wells Fargo would get rid of them. So I don't necessarily fault Stripe at that point. When it goes higher, and that seems to be the ongoing theme with doing research, is that a lot of times people get to the point. Somebody was criticizing me yesterday on YouTube because they said that because I was pointing out this Doge thing that you and I could talk about later, that people think that that's where you should stop. And I thought that that was a presupposition on that person's part, that I don't ever think you should stop. I always think that you should go higher because I think everybody's got a boss. Yeah, so that's kind of like how we got here.
There's so many things here, and we'll get to some of the other things later, like the deplatforming, which I think is important. But just for real quick, I want you to speak to something, because there's a very minority of listeners of mine that think this way. When you say your father or mother at Rand Corporation, right? I'm assuming people are going to be like, "Oh, he's a globalist," and I'm like, I was a staff assistant at the European Union, at the United Nations when I was a graduate student in Geneva. I shook hands with globalist Mikhail Gorbachev. And so does that make me a globalist? No, it's like if you have, if in your circumstance, that was just your circumstance, or who would reject, the way I was looking at it is like, wow, it'd be amazing to have access to walk the halls of the UN and see how things work from the inside. And I've always been an anti-globalist, but why deny this opportunity? And just have you gotten sort of flack? Has anyone sort of said, "Hey, you're Rand, or you're some controlled opposition," or like something like that?
I get it all. I get it all the time. But the thing is that I was such a normie when I walked into this stuff. I drank all the Kool-Aid. I read all of the books. I read, Good to Great by Jim Collins, and The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, and Freakonomics by James Surowiecki. And I just kind of thought that's the way the world worked. When 9/11 happened, I was in the middle of launching a project for Windows XP. I was working with Bill Gates that week. My daughter got born a month early, and I wound up not going to New York and doing this event with him, but I was scheduled to go do this event with Bill Gates. Bill Gates kind of pimped my work at what's that electronic show, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, and that led to like the last kind of big Harry Reid Porkboro project that I worked on in Vegas, something called the Springs Preserve. But I was completely disconnected from politics. I was completely disconnected from history. As far as Rand is concerned, I learned game theory. I learned a lot about how the world works by looking at maps and figuring out things like the defensive characteristics of terrain. the speed of certain types of military units. These were with these games called Avalon Hill games. The Avalon Hill is in Maryland, so it's a hop, skip, and a jump from DC. And I just thought I was playing games. Like I didn't really think too much about it. And so later on, when I started connecting the dots, I didn't really understand what controlled opposition was. Like I didn't know what it was. So when people were accusing me of being things like alt-right, like I didn't even really know how to respond because I didn't understand what the landscape of the game space was that I was walking into. I didn't realize that the tagline on my current website, the Duke Report, is all news is made up. Some of it is true. And that's what I learned from, working for 4 years with Chuck Johnson is that, we would make things up every day and that would become the news. And so when you change your frame from assuming that the people who are wearing the ties and have the nice haircuts are telling you the truth and that this is what's really going on, to understanding that all of this stuff is made up and that there's agendas behind whatever it is that's going on coming out of people's mouths, then you have to kind of readjust. You have to deal with that. But I've always tried to be, I didn't take the path that a lot of people took. I wanted to go to art center. My dad wouldn't pay for it. I dropped out of school. I got a job as working in a camera store so that I would understand all of the camera equipment. Then I got a job as an assistant so that I could understand what the photography business was all about. And then I became a photographer. So I did this kind of, journeyman kind of path on how to get to where I went. And I think that I was developing critical thinking skills the whole way because I was trying to figure things out all the time. I did get into a situation when I worked in a camera store. I told Richard Grove this story, where my boss called me back into his office and he told me that I was the most autonomous fuck he'd ever met, which later in looking at and participating with Richard Grove's autonomy program, I realized that was a giant compliment. I just didn't know what it meant when he said it. So I always try to understand what the frame is of the type of questions that are being put to me, and I understand what the box is that people want to put me in. And I try to, at this point, I try to come from a place of love and get them to understand what I'm doing, as opposed to reacting to whatever their presuppositions are. And I've learned how to do that by teaching myself linguistics.
Yeah, I just want to bring up that point because often in the conspiracy world, some folks go a little bit too extreme, paranoid, schizo, and not everything is black and white. And things are complicated. There's nuance. There's gray areas. And so, I had a guest once. He might be listening now, Fadi Lama. And he had in his resume that he was a consultant for the EU EBRD or research and development. And one of my listeners says, "Oh, he's a globalist because he consulted." I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. The fact that not necessarily, right? There could be people like with your background who had parents in Rand, and they could be continuing on with the official narrative, or others like yourself, which that means absolutely nothing, and you've gone a different direction. So I think that's important, that we cannot just have this sort of kindergarten view of things. And just real quick, you mentioned some of these big names. Have you ever met some of these folks like Thiel and Gates? And does that give you now any insight into how the world works? Or
100%. Yeah. Let me see. Starting at the beginning, I had lunch with. I had a brunch. So when I worked at News Corp and we built the xfiles.com, Rupert came down to visit us for lunch one day, and they put out this big spread. And I was cleaning up my office, and my boss, Lucy Hood, at the time said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm cleaning up my office." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because Rupert's coming." And she said, "Don't clean up your office. He doesn't trust people who have clean desks." And so I left it there. So then I spent, 10 minutes with Rupert Murdoch. When I was at GameWorks, I spent 5 minutes with Steven Spielberg. When I worked at Virgin. I was with Richard Branson a couple of times. He was drunk both times. And by virtue of the fact that I was shooting celebrities at the end of my first photography career, I was in the room a lot of times. I mean, I worked at the producers building as a creative director at Universal with Joel Schumacher. And I was in the same offices with Joel Schumacher and Joel Silver and John Peters and Peter Guber, and those people were around. So yeah, I mean, I watched how the sausage was made in a lot of those cases, and at the end of the day, the big takeaway is that all those people are just people. And so when, you jump ahead a couple of decades and you start to understand that the mechanisms for controlling power are money, ideology, compromise, and ego, and that these are thousand or millennia old methods for controlling people, and you understand that these people are just people. Elon Musk, at the end of the day, it's like if he doesn't take a shower, he stinks. That we all have our foibles. We all have our vectors. We all have ways that people can get under our skin or make us do what they want us to do. And so I guess that's my biggest takeaway, is that I don't really kind of hold these marquee idols up as anything more than people who just have a lot of marketing wrapped around them.
I think that's a very good grounded perspective. And again, people who listen to independent media, sometimes they spend too much time creating too much of a mythos, whether good or bad, of these figures. And I think we have to have a more grounded perspective. And
well, don't you think that they've been conditioned into that? I mean, at this point, I do.
Could you expand a bit more on that?
Well, I think that one of the terms that I've recently become aware of, and I wish that I had known it a long time ago, and I found this series of lectures that were done in 1994, about 3 or 4 months ago. Like I had never seen them before, that were done by the LaRouche organization and the Schiller Institute, but it was a bad video on YouTube that had terrible audio and terrible video and terrible lighting, and like everything about it was unwatchable, except the content was some of the most important content that I'd ever heard, ever. And it was a series called Palmerston's Zoo. And I'm spurging out now. I'm trying to remember what your question was.
You mentioned how I was talking about independent media and how people spend too much time building out projecting a mythos.
Yes. Okay. So epistemological warfare is where I want to get to. The reason I'm telling you the Palmerston Zoo story is because I want to get to epistemological warfare. Anyway, I went through, I got all of the scripts for this thing, and then I used AI to recreate it. And it's a podcast that's available on my Substack and on my Buy Me a Coffee. But one of the key components of understanding where we are today, right now, is that for hundreds, if not thousands of years, humanity, I don't know if at all, humanity has been subjected to something called that Webster Tarpley frames as epistemological warfare. And what that means is that the knowledge that we are given, okay, the programming that we are fed and are led to believe is the status quo, okay, is deliberately framed in a way to make us have certain beliefs. So Leo Strauss famously was a guy who taught at the University of Chicago, and he said Americans love good guys and bad guys. And so our media is completely, and Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. Well, if you have a media format like television that's constantly framing people as good guys and bad guys, then you're going to get a population of, and you're watching the Cowboys versus the Rams on the weekend, or UCLA versus USC, or you're voting for the Republicans or the Democrats. You have these kind of built-in good guy, bad guy dialectics that are cultural. They're functionally inculcated in our society. The definition of culture that I use is the values and the processes of the society. Our values have been programmed to make us believe that they're good guys and bad guys. So we're constantly going through this selection process when we're looking at Tucker Carlson. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? We're looking at Trump. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? And I think that frame skews people's belief systems and their thinking away from critical thinking and into knowledge consumption. One of the things that, when you were giving your example, reminded me of how I kind of backed into this linguistic way of looking at the world. I was talking to a hypnotist named Matteo Morelli. He's got a YouTube channel called Mind Titans, and I highly recommend his work because he does the best job, I think, of anybody that I've encountered of explaining neurolinguistic programming in a way that most people can, laymen can understand. But when I was initially engaging with him, he said, well, do you want to learn NLP because you wanted to be a therapist? And I said, no. And he said, do you want to do self-help? Are you trying to lose weight or quit smoking? And I said, no. And he said, well, why do you want to do it? And I said, well, I want to understand how neurolinguistic programming is used in order for politicians to manipulate us and for news media to manipulate us. And he said, well, that's really easy. And I was dumbfounded by how simple he made the whole idea. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, there's only one pattern that they all use. And when you were explaining to me the person who would judge me because, my mother worked at Rand, then that immediately that pattern was what I thought of, and the pattern is, and this is something that Noam Chomsky has written about. It's something that Gregory Bateson has written about. So this is not like an unknown thing. And in fact, neurolinguistic programming is all based on the stuff that these guys wrote, and that pattern is called a cause-effect complex equivalency. Whereas I like to call it, that's 4 long words, and most people will kind of glaze over. So I call it an if then equals because. But it turns out that that one pattern, if this happens, it's because of that, okay, is something that almost all wholesale knowledge is based on, this one pattern. And when you understand that things that are presented in that pattern short circuit our critical thinking capabilities, okay, then it becomes a superpower, because you don't actually have to have domain experience in the things that people are talking about in order to determine whether or not they're feeding you a line of crap. And I'll give you an example. This is the simplest example that I can give is, if somebody says all women are bitches, you don't have to know anything about what a woman is. You don't have to know anything about what a bitch is to come back with the question, all of them? And in that way, linguistics becomes like a superpower, because you could take a look at the way that words are actually sentences are actually constructed as they're coming out of people's mouths. And by what I call active listening, you can determine whether or not what they're saying has holes in it. And I can tell you that there's a guy named Robert Dilts who worked with Gregory Bateson, who wrote a book called Sleight of Mouth. And he's got a new version of the book called The User's Guide to Sleight of Mouth that's out now. And what Dilts figured out is that when people present information in this one pattern, which they all do, that there's at least 14 different ways that you can reframe their argument without having any domain understanding of what they're talking about. That is, just by virtue of the way that they actually construct the sentence, there are ways to come back at that. And that has turned into a superpower for me, because I don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether or not somebody knows what they're talking about, because if they're presenting it in a particular format, I'm pretty sure they don't.
Would an example be, you mentioned like how they tried to label you, the system tried to label you alt, right? Because you took a photo of some Cernovich or something, and then by that connection, you are alt right, or what the guy, if you Rand, okay, so now you're a globalist, or I've had
Yeah,
this,
that's called a complex equivalency.
right,
Yes.
or like the security state. Like the past couple of years, I've had the security state. They have these spook accounts, spook websites, and they've tried to pin me down as a neo-Nazi, far-right, anti-Semitic, fascist. And I point out I'm a Mexican Slav. My grandfather was a prisoner of the Nazis. Like, just by default, I married a brown Mexican. Like, by default, I can't be that. But and then now they came around, just and they try to fill my channels or comments with this neo-Nazi or pro-Kremlin commentary, and then the system wants to say, "Oh, I interviewed some Russian or something. He's now a Russian agent." So is that same sort of?
Yeah, I mean, you're experiencing signature reduction, and again, because of my weird Forrest Gump kind of life, I've been in signature reduction offices in Arlington, Virginia, where there's buildings full of people who do nothing except what you're talking about. I've been in the room. The funny thing about calling me alt-right, and if you go to my Peter Duke photo website, I memorialized the comments that people made in the New York Times Magazine article about me. But they're trying to frame me as a Nazi, and I literally, and I hate it when people use the word literally, I literally designed the online education system for Steven Spielberg's Holocaust Foundation. So calling me an anti-Semite or a Nazi or any of those things doesn't really stick. And, my criticism of my Zionist friends is that they don't know who the Zionists actually work for. And if they did, maybe they'd be a little bit more understanding about why people who are quote unquote alt-right understand the things that they understand or say the things that they do. But there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, Richard Poe, I think, has done, great work. The reason that I put together this Palmerston Zoo podcast series based on this old 1994 lectures that I watched is because I think it is really important information. And I think LaRouche had his signature reduced in the most extreme way, which is that they put him in jail. That seems to be a tell for me. I mean, I think that in many cases, if somebody gets put in jail, it's probably because they're onto something. So that's good metadata.
Yeah, and this is a good segue and sort of to my next question is just to get your thought on who runs the world. What are their goals? I'm coming from a biblical Christian worldview where you look at prophecy, it talks about we're progressing towards this totalitarian world state, essentially. Like that's the main thing as I see it. And they want it to be algorithmic, technocratic. And a lot of the other stuff is noise, because they're using a lot of the other developments as pretext to construct this totalitarian world state. And they say in their own writings, the elites, if you, it's really boring, but if you pour through their white papers and meetings, they talk about, hey, we're going to use this whole pandemic health stuff or climate environment stuff or the threat of nuclear war, Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and all these, and even Rand say we have got all these problems, so now we have to construct a global governance architecture to solve these problems. And so what's sort of, given your experience and research, your thoughts on who's running the world, what's going on?
Well, the same people are running the world who are running the world. You mentioned being a Christian. I think the same people are running the world who were running the world when Jesus was around. And part of what my work has been lately is linguistically analyze. E. Michael Jones wrote this book called Logos Rising. And the thesis of this book is that the word logos and Christ is described as, Jesus is described as logos incarnate, that the translation of the word to word, is problematic. And understanding what I understand now about epistemological warfare, I immediately kind of connected the dots that if you wanted to hide the meaning of certain things, you wouldn't translate the words the way that you wanted, the way that they were intended. And that's why people who are exegetes, people who studied the Bible in the original language, have an advantage because they can go and look at those things. Well, one of the great things about GPT or AI engines is that they have all the original Greek text and they can do things like that. So I think that, and again, I backed into this entire, I'm calling it Christian linguistics, from my looking at neurolinguistic programming, my understanding how words can be used as weapons, my understanding that epistemological warfare involves changing the meanings of things like words in order to be able to steer society into one direction or another. And the word logos means, it doesn't mean words. It means everything that you can do with words. So you and I right now, in having this conversation, the people who are listening to this conversation right now and are connecting any kind of dots by listening to it are executing logos. All right. You are using the critical thinking part of your mind. And I think that if you take this cause-effect complex equivalency that this guy Matteo Morelli explained to me, again, Jeffrey Bateson talks about it, Gregory Bateson, Noam Chomsky, anybody who's a linguist can tell you what a cause-effect complex equivalency is. And then you look at logos on the other end of a spectrum, which is critical thinking, which is taking ideas apart, breaking them down, and trying to move closer to the truth, which is God. Then you understand that you've got this dynamic in Christianity, right? That Jesus is talking about. Okay. And there's a lot of hidden, nuanced things. And when I say hidden, it doesn't mean that like, oh yeah, there's some unpublished book like the Kabbalah, or there's some unpublished book like the Talmud, or it's published by these other people over here, and it's a secret society. And if you go through this initiation process, we'll let you in on the secret. No, it's not there. I think it's all there. I think it's right there in the Bible, and I think Jesus was dealing with it. But to answer your question, it's oligarchs, it's oligarchy, it's people who use epistemological warfare, that is the control of language and knowledge. They use usury, so they use debt-based money as opposed to credit-based money. And part of the reason that I think that many of the things that are going on with Donald Trump right now being phony and fake and all these other things is that, and why I have questions about people like Ron Paul. You don't want to audit the Fed. You want to get rid of the Fed. The Fed is a usurious, debt-based economic system. And if there's a ton of books, I think Debt, the first 5,000 years or the first 4,000 years is one. But there's a bunch of books. You could trace the people who run the world by just tracing debt-based management. Debt-based economies. And so, and if you look at the work of people like C. Wright Mills in 1950 published a book called The Power Elite. And what he found out in his research was that something like 80% of the top 400 wealthiest families in the United States in 1950 were related to 80% of the top 400 wealthiest families in 1850. And if you go back to 1750, it's the same story. And so his thesis, and I think that he's probably right, is that the wealthy people who control the world are the wealthy people who have always controlled the world. And they're a group of families. Webster Tarpley does a great job of describing them in a book called On Oligarchy. Some people call part of them the black nobility. There's different factions, there's different, to say that it's all one group is a misnomer. But I think that part of the reason that it's difficult to figure out who they are, and this is something, by the way, blockchain could fix very quickly, is that they use shell companies in order to hide their ownership in things. Because if people who are looking at billionaires and thinking that they're the wealthiest people in the world understood that there might be trillionaires and quadrillionaires out there, except that they just do a very good job because they have so much money, and they wage epistemological warfare in order to control what you know. Then they do a very good job of making the population understand or know that they're not even a factor. They don't even exist. And so they're very good at being invisible in plain sight.
There was a Bloomberg article maybe last year, just sort of give an example, even for mainstream globalist publications like Bloomberg, which I think they mentioned Liechtenstein and one of the princes of Liechtenstein or whatever, that their wealth went back to 1200, that their land holdings and all that. And, I've been to Italy, I've visited the Order of Malta, and I've stayed in the home inadvertently, just because of a friend, in the home of the Knights of Milan of the Order of Malta. And because it was urban Milan, it looked like a normal home. But now looking back in hindsight, I think it was actually a castle. And I remember being taken to the room where I would sleep for the night. And I'm walking down the hall and I'm thinking, okay, this must be the room. And I was like about to go into it. And we just keep walking down the hall, so many rooms. And I was like, whoa, this guy is loaded with cash. And I like Mark Passio's term lately. I've been using occultocracy. And that sort of gels with my biblical worldview and the idea that it's not just the Jews or the Jesuits, or I feel like, you've got the Jews or the Zionist faction, and you've got the Jesuit faction, you've got the Masonic faction, you've got, there's a Saudi lobby that's in, Saudi elites plugged into this, and many others. And then you form this occultocracy, which goes back to what you mentioned earlier, that it's money, ideology, ego, and I forget the other one, but
money, ideology, compromise, and ego, or compromise or coercion and ego. But the one that they leave out now that's an actual CIA term. They changed it later. This guy named Bustamante updated it, and he calls it RICE, which is reward, ideology, compromise, or ego. But the one that they leave out, that I never leave out, is family. Okay, because what I learned in my 4 years of working with an intelligence asset is that family is everything. Like, it is the way that you become a made man. Elon Musk is a made man. And what does made mean? It means somebody made him. Somebody called him up and said, take this money, go over here, invest it in this. Here's the technology. We're going to set you up with these patents that we just took out of the Defense Department. And this guy is going to build everything. You're going to take the money out of the bank. You're going to go down to Sand Hill Road. You're going to start a company up. And then we're going to hook you up with this other guy who's going to do the PR on this thing. And people are made. They're manufactured.
Yeah, I totally agree, and yeah, I was listening to one of your excellent podcasts on that, and Jeff Bezos, Musk, I mean, you name it, and your earlier point that a lot of this wealth has been around for centuries, millennia, and there are these dynasties in Europe and other parts of the world, and they're hidden behind the scenes, and you won't find them on the Forbes 500 list and all that sort of thing. And you mentioned E. Michael Jones. I had him on my TNT show. Unfortunately, for controversial reasons, I guess TNT ended up never posting the recording. So I've chatted with him. And by the way, you unwittingly made a devil horn sign with your hands. So someone's going to take a snapshot of that and say you are Illuminati. I'm being silly here.
It's funny because I've got a really good friend who's in the film business, and he does this all the time because it's his way of cropping a shot when he's figuring out the focal length of the lens that he wants to use in a shot. He puts his fingers up like this. So now I'm out of focus. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I mean, I'm just making fun here. I think sometimes we have to make fun of ourselves in the whole conspiracy.
Yes, I do too.
You mentioned Tarpley real quick. I used to listen to Tarpley in the 2000s. He was in the Obama deception with Alex Jones and all that stuff. He was early on LaRoucheite. William Engdahl, whose work I really love. I have had him on the podcast probably over half a dozen times. And I feel like I just checked up on my, maybe a year ago or some months ago. I'm like, what's up with Webster Tarpley? Let's check in on him. And he seems to have gone completely off the deep end. And I think there are other examples of people like him who used to, talk about the deep state and all of that, and then they just became left wing, like liberal globalist libtards. I don't know what happened, but have you?
Well, here's what I think. I don't know this. Okay, I'm guessing. Okay, but Tarpley was a Fulbright scholar, and J. William Fulbright was a Rhodes Scholar. So I wonder whether or not he was always a counterintelligence asset, and it wasn't until Lyndon LaRouche passed away that he could drop the mask, as it were. I don't know that that's true, but Helga Zepp LaRouche, who is she a brilliant woman? Yes. Was she a lot younger than LaRouche? Yes. Could she have been an asset? Maybe. Because she's like a giant champion of BRICS. I mean, the whole LaRouche organization kind of like fell apart after Lyndon LaRouche passed away. And and I wasn't paying any attention to it at all before that. So all of this stuff I've only become kind of privy to by looking at things like LaRouche Pub and watching the Harley Schlanger and people like that. But it seems like after LaRouche passed away, like Helga went off back to Germany, and she's got her Schiller Institute. And then when the LaRouche PAC in the United States started getting behind Donald Trump, she had a big philosophical problem with that. And those two organizations split. So the LaRouche PAC in the United States isn't called LaRouche PAC anymore. It's called Promethean PAC. And Prometheus is another kind of like weird thing. Then you start getting into this other guy. I can't remember what his name is, who's got the Prometheus organization. I can't remember what's his name. Anyway, but she's a big fan of BRICS. And there's a lot of people who think BRICS is just another dialectic. You've got the Bretton Woods.
Yeah, that's my question. I'm one of those people. Yeah. I've interviewed a number of these pro-Schiller folks. Some of them have been on the podcast, but it's kind of what you alluded to earlier, this framing that they've given us: good guy, good cop, bad cop. And I'm here in Mexico, and there are some Mexicans, global South mentality, and they view the U.S. as this evil empire, as do I. But that doesn't mean bad guy. Let's go to run into the arms of the grass is greener. Good guy, Xi Jinping and Putin. I often view it as there's no good guys. It's all bad guys and interests. But I feel like BRICS. I've talked about this on the podcast. I just feel like it's another psyop, and it's actually pushing us towards world federation and technocratic world government. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that it's funny because there's certain people there's a guy named Stephen Coughlin. I have tremendous respect for him.
I met him last year. Okay. I met him last year at the American Freedom Alliance conference in LA.
Yeah, I have tremendous respect for his work. I did 4 different posts on breaking down his dialectic warfare lectures on his website, which are genius, and I think everybody should watch them. Except that he still is supporting the whole Israel-Hamas dialectic. And it's like, how come this one is not? And I think I know the answer to the question because I know people who he works with, literally who he works with. And I think that it's because they pay their mortgages in their DC suburb locations with contracts that they have with Zionist groups. And he wants to keep making his rent, I guess. That's, and again, money, ideology, coercion, ego, all of these things start to, they always wind up, as my friend George Webb would say, being the answer to the test. So I don't know whether or not it's money, ideology, coercion, or ego that has made Webster Tarpley go off in the direction, or family, but it's one of them. Likewise, Helga Zepp LaRouche, it's one of them. The people that you're talking about, it's one of them. And it's difficult for people who are locked into this kind of Straussian way of looking at the world to separate themselves from that and then say, okay, did they just buy a new house? You know what I mean? Webster famously accused Melania Trump of being a prostitute. And my guess is he probably got that information from some intelligence asset. And maybe there's some validity to the story, but he said it so vociferously and so loudly to such a big audience that he wound up getting sued by her and lost. She got a judgment against him. So, you got to be careful.
Yeah, I've got Stephen Coughlin's card that he actually gave me right here, but I haven't reached out to him yet for an interview. But just any other thought on BRICS multipolarity before we move on? That just seems to me. I don't know why some people in independent media are myopic and they ignore some of the red flags when it comes to BRICS and just keep on pushing it. I think part of that is probably ideology. That they believe in or want to believe in, or also maybe money, because I think there's, again, financing behind the scenes. But you look at all these countries, Lula, in one of the clips I posted of Lula in Brazil like 2 years back during COVID, which went viral on X, where he said, we have this project, Bolsa Familia, which is the social welfare program in Brazil. He literally said, Lula, BRICS, Brazil, I don't care if you have to get injected 50 times with the COVID vaccine. If you don't, you're going to lose access to your welfare. And then, the totalitarian censorship that's going on in Brazil and Russia deploying technocracy and QR codes and lockdown in China and all that. And then you look at the meeting in Kazan, you compare it to G7, G20, UN, EU meetings. It's the same language, Agenda 2030, climate change, digital currencies, blah, blah, blah. And they even talk about, disinformation and so forth. And so I don't see any difference.
Because there isn't any. But people, again, I think James Corbett turned me on to it was Edward Slavsquat, I think.
Ray Wagaman, yeah, he's been on I had him a couple of years back on the podcast. Yeah.
Well, he did a story a week or so ago about the language on the BRICS agreement and then the G20, or I can't remember, and they were identical, like that they had just put it through GPT or something and changed the sentence structure or something, but they all were making exactly the same, point for point, they were making the same things. Which again, this is a critical thinking way of looking at stuff. People go, do you like the Republicans or the Democrats? It's like, let's talk about. I'm trying to break all of this stuff down in my book to these kind of very simple ideas. Culture is the values and the processes of a society. Okay. What most people don't understand, and again, I can tie this to Argentina or Brazil, and I can tie it back to the Doge thing that we were talking about earlier, because I put together a bunch of slides. But culture is the values and the processes. This is a Harvard Business School definition of culture: the values and processes of an organization or a society. And what I like about that is that it's not when Tim Pool is talking about how Marvel Comics is culture, I just think, no, you don't understand what culture is. Culture is the values and the processes. Now, you may use comic books in order to deliver your values. So the process of creating a comic book may be epistemological warfare that you use for distributing your ideas. But if you have to have an idea that culture is values and processes, and the culture is something that maintains a cohesion in a society. Liberty, which is a word that's completely misunderstood. Tulsi Gabbard could not describe. She spoke at the American Liberty Conference a month ago or so, and she had to look up the definition of the word liberty before she got to the conference. And even when she stood up in front of the conference and read the Webster's Dictionary definition of liberty, she didn't get it. She didn't understand it. And again, this is part of the epistemological warfare world that we live in. Liberty is freedom within limits. Who sets the limits? What's the implicit idea there? The implicit idea is that when a captain of a ship pulls his ship into harbor, he gives the crew liberty, meaning you're free. The captain says that you're free to leave the ship, and as long as you're back at a certain time and you're not drunk, then everything will be okay. Okay, but if you stay out too late and if you come back sauced, okay, there's going to be consequences. Who's going to give you the consequences? The captain's going to give you the consequences. Liberty is freedom within limits. So we keep talking, we interchange these things. I've talked to Guido Preparata in Italy about this. Okay. I said, Guido, in Italian, is there a difference between liberty and freedom? And he goes, no, it's all libertad, right? It's all libertad. And on all of these flags and coats of arms and all of these revolutions, which I'm arguing red hats are revolutionary hats, that people are fighting for liberty. Tulsi Gabbard did 2 tours in Iraq, and she served in Congress, and she didn't know what the word liberty meant. That's a problem. That's an epistemological problem with our society, is that people don't actually even know what the words mean. And I'm sorry I'm spurging out. I can't remember what my original point was going to be.
Well, if you want to go a bit into the whole Trump Doge stuff,
Sure.
and my thought immediately was, because I've interviewed Patrick Wood twice of Technocracy, and what really sticks in my mind is, they talk about this Department of Government Efficiency, whittling down the government, Ramaswamy and Musk and all that, and I'm like, what they're doing is transitioning us to technocracy. And they always play on ideas that sound good, that are good, like limiting the size of government. But their goal to do that is to then move us towards oligarchy, that my favorite term that these existentialist totalitarian freaks like Nick Bostrom say. He talks about, we need a totalitarian algocratic world government. He says that in his papers, and so they want to bring
Curtis.
Who?
Moldbug. Curtis Yarvin.
Oh, okay, yeah, and they want to replace it with scientific dictatorship, with experts, with AI running everything, and so if you want to tell us a bit about your Doge, it's like the new aristocracy, no?
Yeah, it's actually very old.
The new old.
If you could let me share a screen,
yeah, you should be able to do that. Yeah.
Let me see. All right. So this is Elon. This is my starting slide. So Elon is I had Elon's Grok AI create a version of Elon where he is a Doge, and this is the hat that a Doge wears. And what's a Doge? So in the Venetian Republic, which was an oligarchy, that is, it was a series of wealthy families that called all of the shots, for the purpose of maintaining the public support of the republic. They had a grand council that was basically the equivalent of something like the House of Commons in Great Britain, which was supposedly supposed to be looking out for the best interest of the people. But in reality, what they were just doing is that they were servicing the needs of the oligarchy and placating the people by throwing them sops, by throwing them, little gifts now and then in order to make them think that they had control over things. So why is this important? It's important because Elon is now pimping this Department of Government Efficiency, and there's obviously a signature increase. Signature reduction is to take people's public perception down, and signature increases to move it up. And so there's this Department of Government Efficiency, and he's pimping this. Well, what's interesting is that you start to look at it, and there's another Doge thing that he was involved in, which is this thing called Dogecoin, which was based on this dog here, which was the mispronunciation by teenagers of dog or Doge or Doge. So you've got this dog Doge thing. Here's the dog, and somebody created supposedly a joke cryptocurrency that was called Dogecoin. And famously, Elon Musk, it was supposed to be a joke, and then it wound up becoming a pump and dump scheme where a few people made a lot of money. And primarily, they made a lot of money because Elon Musk decided that he was going to get behind Dogecoin. And I think that, I'm not sure of this, but when he did his flamethrower stunt, I think that maybe one of the ways that you could pay for your flamethrower was Dogecoin. It was something like that. Anyway, so this is then he announced the Department of Government Efficiency, and you could see that they're putting it together with this dog again, and they're going to cut red tape. And why do I think that this is a problem? I think it's a problem because going back in history a little bit, there's this guy named Edward Mandelhouse. And Edward Mandelhouse wrote a book called he was the handler of Woodrow Wilson, and he wrote a book called Philip Drew Administrator, where he talked about how you could use the administrative state to take over control of the United States government in the case of an emergency. And here's a picture of Elon Musk walking with Donald Trump, and here's a picture of Edward Mandelhouse walking with Woodrow Wilson. So he wrote this book called Philip Drew Administrator. And so this is evidence point number one. Evidence point number two that I've got is this guy, Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler was the most decorated Marine in U.S. military history. And in 1933, some bankers, I think from the Morgan Bank, approached him and offered to set him up as the new dictator of the United States of America if he would lead a march of 500,000 veterans on Washington, D.C. And they suggested to him, the plotters, that they were going to create a new cabinet position called the Secretary of General Affairs, which would be a kind of catch-all cabinet post that would basically take control of all of the things that the oligarchs wanted the presidency to manage for them, and that Roosevelt would assume a figurehead role. Well, it didn't work out because Butler was a Quaker, and Butler happened to believe that the Constitution of the United States of America was a good thing, and it was the reason that he put his life on the line for 33 years. And so he waited until he had enough information, and he testified before Congress. And although Congress was so owned by that point that nothing really happened as a result. I mean, there were a lot, Time Magazine famously, and, all of the usual suspects came out to smear him. But about 5 weeks after the event happened, after his testimony happened, then the guy who was trying to set him up as the dictator at the age of 36 died about 5 weeks later. So that anybody who had any direct evidence of anything disappeared. And if you've got here's a 1 minute 36-second video of Butler talking about it. Let's see if the audio works here.
No, I don't. We don't have the audio.
Yeah, I don't have the audio. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Anyway, you can find this video on YouTube. Anyway, so here's a picture of the Doge dog wearing a Doge outfit, and then here's a picture of the Doge dog, and this is the Doge's palace in Venice, Italy. Where as a sidebar, there's a guy named Nicholas Bergrun, who I believe is the Doge of California.
Just by the way, I watched your presentation on this the other day, and back in May, I've been trying to write some articles, and I haven't had time, and so they're sort of still in draft format. But I went down a rabbit hole, and I started writing on Nicholas Bergrun, and I found an article where he was trying to sort of compete with Bilderberg and Trilateral Commission. He wanted to, sort of create a new version of it. And I just, haven't finished that article, but I think I'll eventually get onto it. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, my assumption is that he's been tasked with that job. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so here's a Doge of Venice. Here's a couple more Doges of Venice. And you'll notice that they're all wearing this hat, right? And here's the hat. It's called the Corona Ducale, the ducal hat, the ducal crown. And it's got this kind of weird shape where it's got this, kind of goes up. at one end. And here's the logo for the city of Venice. You'll see that it's got the Corona di Cavalli on the top. It's also got the lion with the eagle wings. And I believe that Great Britain is the lion and the United States is the eagle wings in the current configuration of the Venetian oligarchy. And here's another version of it. You can see it's got a very ornate Corona di Cavalli on the top. So the Corona di Cavalli, I'll just read. This is from Wikipedia. People criticize me for using Wikipedia, but occasionally it's useful. The Corona di Cavalli, a unique ducal hat, was the headgear and the symbol of the Doge of Venice. It was a stiff horn-like bonnet, which was made of a gemmed brocade or a cloth of gold and worn over a camaro. The ducal horn was a fine linen cap with a structured peak at the back, reminiscent of the Phrygian cap, a classical symbol of liberty. Now, remember, liberty is freedom within limits. It's freedom that is given to you by a higher power, by somebody who's got more power than you do. And as a symbol of liberty, from the Phrygian cap, so I'll jump to the Phrygian cap here. In late Republican Rome, a soft felt cap called the Peleus served as a symbol of free men and was symbolically given to slaves upon manumission, thereby granting them not only their personal liberty, but their libertas, freedom as citizens with the right to vote, if male. So this is a hat that's given to you by somebody who's got more power than you, who represents the state, who gives your freedom to you. Okay, it's deeded to you. This stands in contrast to natural rights and natural law, which Mark Passio talks about so passionately, which is that in the framers' understanding of inalienable rights, nobody gives you those rights but God, right? When the word liberty when the word liberty is used by these people, what they're saying is that the liberty is given to you by the oligarchs. They're giving the oligarchs, you're getting your freedom by the pleasure of the oligarchs. So I jump to, in Venice, the Phrygian cap was used by the Doge instead of a crown as a symbol of Republican liberty. So the Doge was working at his liberty was granted to him by the oligarchy. From the Middle Ages until 1797, the symbol, which is when Napoleon finally ended the Venetians in Venice. But by that time, they had moved to London anyway, so it didn't matter. They had moved to Amsterdam, and then they had moved to London. The symbol of libertas as a female figure holding the Phrygian cap upon a spear appeared in the 1500s in the Apotheosis of Venice, major painting, blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's go on to the Roman world. The Phrygian cap reappears in figures related to the 1st and 4th century religion of Mithraism. Okay, this is important because Bloomberg in the city of London is built on top of a temple of Mithras, and these Mithric temples are built under a lot of churches in Europe. They're called Mithraeum. And it's an astrology-centric Roman mystery cult. The mystery cults are the compromise operations that are used in order to create a culture of control as a secret society, projected itself with pseudo-Oriental trappings known as perserie in scholarship in order to distinguish itself from both traditional Roman religion and from other mystery cults. Again, I think that these things are all kind of like compromise operations that have been going on for millennia. In the artwork of the cult, the figures of the god Mithras, as well as those of the helpers, are routinely depicted with this Phrygian cap. The function of the Phrygian cap in the cult are unknown, but the convention, it's unknown to Wikipedia, but I think that we can start to kind of tease something out of it. But it's conventionally identified as an accessory. Okay, great. Yeah, people are wearing the same accessory for thousands of years. So where does this manifest itself? This is Marie. She's the symbol of the French Revolution. The one exposed breast, I think, has something to do with her being an Amazon. So I think that this goes back to the story, the ancient stories of the Amazons. Here she's got her breast covered. Here is the Phrygian cap on top of a pole again, and this is on the freeing. This is a British document on the freeing of the slaves. Okay, so the slaves have been freed. Okay, but everybody is being given their Phrygian cap. The oligarchs have given you your freedom. Okay, as long as you do what they say, you'll have your freedom. Here is Miss Liberty, World War I, written as a fundraiser. Here are French revolutionaries. Here is, I think this is from Puck. This is Louis the XVI wearing a Phrygian cap. Of course, this didn't really happen. This is the allegory of the French Revolution by Antoine Jean Giraud. This is the allegory of the Spanish Republic wearing the Phrygian cap. Again, we've got the one breast exposed, so she's an Amazon, but she's got the Phrygian cap. This is the effigy of the Republic of Brazil. This is Young America. Now, if you watch my Palmerston Zoo, or I'm sorry, if you listen to my Palmerston Zoo podcast, then you'll know that the Young America, and this is around 1820 to 1890. So this is around the time of Giuseppe Manzini and David Urquhart and Napoleon III, and the creation of the B'nai B'rith. Then you'll recognize that Young America, young societies that start with the word young, wind up being part of this British globalist mayhem program that sows a divisive politics into existing governments in order to overthrow them. But it gets older. This is 6th century BC. This is the three wise men bringing frankincense, myrrh, and gold to the baby Jesus, and they're wearing these Phrygian caps. This is the Trojans. This is from the 4th century. This is the Judgment of Paris. This is Paris of Troy wearing a Phrygian cap. This is about 117 AD. This is a bust of Docker with a Phrygian cap. This is the 2nd century. So we're getting back close to the time of Christ. This is the sculpture of Attis, which is part of the cult of Cybele, wearing a Phrygian cap. And the whole cult of Cybele thing is a whole rabbit hole we could go down. This 1st century AD, 350 BC, and it goes all the way. This is 350 BC. I'm not sure how old this is, but this is a myth from a Mithraeum in let's see, in Thrace, I think. And the oldest one that I've got is 30 BC. This is an Armenian Macedonian head of Antiochus. And this is 192 AD, Mithras. And the god Mithras being born from a rock naked, but for his Phrygian cap on his head. So this is in Rome. But here's where it starts to get interesting. Here's the symbol of the United States Senate. It's got a Phrygian cap and it says liberty on it. And also it's got crossed fasci on the bottom. A lot of people hear this word fascist all the time, and they like to throw it around and use whatever epistemological nonsense term definition that they have for it. But the United States Congress and all of the cornices on all the furniture in the Congress, they're all decorated with fasci. Here's the logo for the United States Army. It's got the red cap on the pole. Here is a coin. The 1783 Libertas Americana medal initiated and designed by Benjamin Franklin. It's got the cap on a pole. This is the Liberty Dollar with the cap on a pole. Here's the logo for the state of North Carolina, the state of Iowa, the state of West Virginia, the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado doesn't have the Phrygian cap, but it's got the eye and the fasci. You've got Idaho with the cap on a pole. You've got the state of Hawaii with the Phrygian cap with the figure on the right, also holding what looks like a stylized flag of the British East India Company. The state of New Jersey, pole with a cap. State of New York, pole with a cap. State of Arkansas, pole with a cap. This is I can't remember what this is from, but I will go quickly to Nicaragua. It has a Phrygian cap. Haiti has a Phrygian cap. El Salvador, I believe. Yes, El Salvador. El Salvador is interesting. Yesterday, this was tweeted out by Ginger Gates. Ginger Gates is the wife of Matt Gaetz, who I guess has stepped down from being Attorney General today. But Ginger Gates is Palmer Luckey's sister. So Matt Gaetz is married to Palmer Luckey's sister, and Matt Gaetz has been vociferously anti-DJI drone lately. And his brother-in-law, Palmer, is an American manufacturer of drones. I think that's interesting.
He's head of what's called Anduril, no?
Anduril, yes, Anduril. Another guy, I know Palmer. I've been to his house. Full disclosure, he's always been very kind to me. All right, this is Cuba. Now, Castro came into power and he didn't change their logo. I think maybe he added the star on, but he's got a star on the red cap. This is, I didn't write down what country this is. Oh, I think it's, I can't remember which one. Uruguay, maybe. Then you've got, Argentina. You've got, the flag raised during the Irish Rebellion of 1803. This is the Argentinian Confederation. This is the coat of arms of Paraguay. This is the Santa Catarina state of Brazil. This is Rio de Janeiro.
So I just want to just add, like, for me, this is wild, like unbelievable. And it overlaps with some of my past guests. You know, I had on Dutch, I think Dutchman, Mies Bayjan, who, you know, in his book, he talks about these powers that go back thousands of years. I think Fadi Lama, who I also had on, and then what you're bringing up, I've never seen before, which is, I think, another very important piece to this puzzle.
Well, thanks. Again, I'm learning this at the same time. I'm like 2 or 3 days ahead of you on this at this point. This is the Acre state of Brazil. This is Mecielo, Brazil. This is Nueva Esparta, Venezuela. This is Guarico, Venezuela. And this is the logo of the Swiss Party of Labor in Switzerland, basically the Communist Party in Switzerland. This is the Second Regiment of the Ussuri Cisalpine Republic, which I believe was during the fall of the Papal States and the rise of the Italian Republic, the Second Italian Republic, 1798. This is Marie on a poster in year 3 of the Republic.
You're just missing Santa Claus, Smurfs, and Super Mario.
Well, it gets crazier, and this is I think this is from Punch, and this is a cartoon where this is the British Empire. So this is Britannia, who is the British patron goddess, like Columbia. I still haven't figured out why Columbia is the patron goddess of the United States. I haven't figured that out yet. But they're sailing between the rocks of liberty and the whirlpool of arbitrary power. And I think this was done during the French Revolution. And what's interesting to me about that is that understanding that London was ground zero for the creation of the French Revolution. The idea that they were putting this thing out as a way of covering what they were actually doing is interesting, again, from an epistemological.
What would you say, just on that point? I recently came across Mark Passio's work. I watched his 8-hour long lecture on Nazism and communism and how those are two sides of the same coin, and really behind those movements was, I think, what the same as you're referring to, this very occult oligarchic class. And what would you say was London's purpose with carrying out these? The way I view it is, again, it goes back to world government, because the only way to have a world government is to destroy the order that they had at the time of this aristocracy and monarchies, because you can't have a world government of these different kings. You have to do away with that, and you create these sort of republics, quote, democratic republics, and then you patch them all into this sort of world federation, where then you have this world state. Just what's your thought on what they were trying to go for?
Well, we are all raised with this world map. Can you see the map?
Yeah.
We're all raised with this world map that's published by National Geographic, but this is a map that was ostensibly originally created by a guy named Halford Mackinder, who was the president of the London School of Economics that was created by the Fabian Society, and he calls this shape in the middle of the map the Great World Island. And the idea of the Great World Island is that it has enough natural resources and it has a big enough population that a thalassocracy, which is a word that I had never heard before, would be threatened by it. So what's a thalassocracy? So going back to we can go back to the Phoenicians. A thalassocracy is a form of control of the planet that's based on control of the water. So if you control the water, you control the planet. And so the reason that the British Empire, which was had evolved from the Venetians controlled the seas. Their empire was based on seaborne traffic. After the War of the League of Cambrai, they felt that they were too threatened geographically from that position, and that's why they took over Great Britain. So they took over England and then created Great Britain, was because it was a position that they could defend. Basically, it's a fort that's got a big moat around it. And what Mackinder pointed out in this 1904, he wrote two different the impact of geography on I can't remember what the names of his books are, but they're both available on the book section of the Duke Report. What he described was that he calls this middle space the heartland, and you'll see that this happens to be where Russia is. And the heartland has all of the natural resources and people. It has all of the advantages that it needs to be able to be self-sufficient. And around the heartland, he describes something that he calls the inner or marginal crescent. So this is the area that needs to be maintained by a thalassocracy in order to make sure that I'm going to go back here for a second. Oh, actually, can I use my arrow keys? Yeah. I'm going to go back to this one. Okay, so the idea is that if you control this area in the middle, if you keep the area in the middle in complete chaos all the time, and you maintain control over all of the blue areas of the map, then you can maintain your hegemon on the planet. Okay, and so the heartland is the most dangerous part to the thalassocracy, and it's here. And then So what you need to do is you need to create a boundary condition where you keep them from expanding out of that heartland area. And you certainly never want them to get to the land bridge that connects Eurasia with Africa, which is, and he refers to this part as the outer or insular crescent. So you can see that, North America, South America, Australia are all part of the outer crescent. But this area in here is the key. And I have another slide. It's not in this deck, but basically the reason that Ukraine and the Middle East wind up becoming the inflection points for this is because the thalassocracy specifically does not want Africa and Eurasia to ever be connected by something as audacious as railroads, because if the Chinese and this goes back to the Belt and Road, which is what Xi is trying to do. So here's I'll stop sharing for a second. How do I stop sharing? Stop sharing. Okay, trick question. How many railroads connect North America and South America?
I don't think there are any.
Zero. Okay. What was Abraham Lincoln writing letters back and forth with Tsar Alexander II about during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States, which also happened to take place during the Civil War?
Did he want to connect the U.S. with Russia?
Yeah, he wanted, which is why he sold Alaska to the United States for $6 million, because he thought that would sweeten the deal to get a tunnel across the Bering Strait. So this thalassocracy, this is kind of like the long answer to your question. Okay, what do they want? They don't want anybody in the Middle East you can think of the Suez Canal. Don't think of it as a canal that connects two oceans together. Think of it as a moat that cuts Africa off of Eurasia. Don't think of the Panama Canal as something that allows ships to go back and forth. Think of it as a moat that keeps North America and South America from sending land-based commerce. That's what this thalassocracy is all about. It's about maintaining its control of the world by maintaining all commerce over water.
Are they losing control because they're now, I get what you're saying makes sense, Mackinder, all that, but it seems like things are, I don't know if they're losing their power or they've switched gears now, because here in Mexico now you're seeing them begin all of these projects of connectivity, rail. I think they're going to be building, was it Querétaro, Monterrey? They want to connect Texas now and Mexico with rail, and North America and down in Central and South America. And then, but this goes back to what we're talking about earlier, the whole BRICS thing, because BRICS was coined by a young global leader of WEF and Goldman Sachs. And so is that sort of their way to try to manage things going forward? I mean, and your thoughts on that, and then where do you see us going? The road ahead.
The road ahead question. Well, I think that they want to create. I mean, you can look at Orwell and get a good idea. I don't think that they have a problem with continents being synced in building towards global governance. They realize that they need to collapse countries into continents first. So I think that there's going to be a lot of intercontinental things. So Canada, Mexico, this is what was that thing that Bill Clinton signed? That
NAFTA, USMCA,
NAFTA,
now, North American Union.
North American Free Union. They want to create geographical land-based areas because they want to be able to control them within those continents. But they don't want the continents connecting to each other, because it's great if North America is completely contained. It's great if South America is completely contained, and North America and South America are still maintaining all of their commerce by oceans. If they're using water to do it, then the thalassocracy maintains its power.
If I could just then ask your thoughts on the whole Great Reset thing, what you mentioned earlier, one of my biggest fears is I had Edwin Black on the podcast back in 2020. I love his work, IBM and the Nazis and eugenics. And I've been using his phrase of algorithm ghetto. And it's funny, tomorrow I'm having a guest on. She's a musician who inadvertently just wrote a song called Algorithm Ghetto, which is very, very good, testimona. And it's this digital ID gulag, the social credit system. And, you mentioned PayPal in 2022, when the Department of Homeland Security rolled out the Disinformation Governance Board. That same week in April, Mint Press News, Consortium News, and myself were banned from PayPal for life. So I cannot use PayPal. And I just did the other week, I was unable to renew my bank card, which had expired, because they want me to use my Mexican digital ID, which I do not have, which is the Mexican voter card. I've never gotten one. And the UN just put out their plan is to get everyone to link their bank accounts to their digital ID. So now that's here in Mexico. It's coming around the world. You mentioned Stripe and deplatforming. And so your sort of thoughts on this aspect of the project, the Great Reset project, the technocracy, the cashless society, the CBDCs and all that.
Well, it gets crazier. It gets crazier. So I built arguably the first e-commerce website on the World Wide Web. And it was the online store for the xfiles.com, which was the first entertainment website on the internet, on the World Wide Web. And we were waiting for secure transactions to get approved before we could launch the e-commerce site. And so I was very, very involved in paying attention to what the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, was deciding and how they were going to come up with this idea for encryption, right? And the 800-pound gorilla in the space at that time was PayPal. And I'm not sure if Elon Musk had been fired by Peter Thiel yet or not. I think that they were probably still together when the decision was made that the W3C was going to approve something called RSA encryption, which is public key encryption. And RSA encryption is another whole kind of rabbit hole you can go down. What starts to get interesting is in 2020, I think, there's this guy that I follow. He's an interesting cat named Robert Edward Grant. Have you ever had him on your show?
No.
I know that Courtney has had him on her show. So Grant, his story is that he was the CEO of Bausch and Lomb, and for some reason, some really bad business deal went down, and it made him want to quit. And he quit, and then he started pursuing his lifelong ambition, which was to be a mathematician. And this guy's a polymath, autodidact. He speaks a bunch of languages. He's a mathematician. He's like super brilliant. And he ran the division of Bausch and Lomb that did contact lenses and Botox. So he has a kind of a pharma background. Anyway, in his math, and he posts a lot of things on Instagram. And I was following him just kind of like as a curiosity. And I signed up for a lot of newsletters because you wind up getting invited to Zoom calls and things like that in situations that you wouldn't normally have, conversations that you wouldn't normally have. And he did this video after COVID started, where he revealed that by using, I can explain it quickly, but he basically took a look at the way that prime numbers were created, about the way that prime numbers are mapped. That is, in the classic way that you learn how to map things is in rows, like an Excel spreadsheet or something. And he started working on these designs of mapping equations in what look like clocks, clock faces. And he discovered by doing this that there was something that he referred to as periodicity in prime numbers that were multiplied together. And he did some research, and according to him, he discovered that there's this new kind of a number that he calls a quasi-prime. And a quasi-prime is two prime numbers that have been multiplied together. And it turns out that using some math formulas that he came up with, mostly geometry formulas combined with math, that he could solve for the root of if he had one of the factors on a product, he could solve for it mathematically, meaning that he could. And after he figured this out and he published it, somebody got in touch with him because they told him that's how public key encryption works. That's how RSA encryption works, and that if it was correct, what he had just done is that he had just published a backdoor into public key encryption. And so he went and he presented at Black Hat, and there was a bunch of noise that happened when a bunch of signature reduction on him when this happened at Black Hat. But I'll try to bring this all back to, because you were asking me about CBDC, but I think this is important. And that is that in this video that I watched of his, that he explains that after he had discovered this, he got contacted by consultants that used to work for the NSA, and they had said to him that they didn't think that if that was true, that it was ever not implemented without that knowledge. That is, the backdoor for public key encryption was implicit in its adoption in the first place. And I'll bring this back to PayPal. Two of the people who were incredibly important in deciding whether or not public key encryption using RSA was implemented by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, was Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. So what are the implications if this is true? Okay. The implications, if this is true, is that there is no such thing as encryption to intelligence agencies. Okay, that there is a backdoor that is big, because public key encryption is used to encrypt everything on the internet except Swift. Swift doesn't use it. Why would Swift not use it? So the one thing that's kind of hanging out, and I've talked to other journalists about this. I've given Matthew Crawford. Matthew Crawford is a mathematician, and he's very busy. And I've given him all of the work I collected from Grant to see if he could fact check what Grant is saying. But if that's true, then a lot of what we see. I don't know if you've ever talked to Dr. Richard Werner. He wrote a book called the Princes of the Yen.
He's great. I've invited him on, never got a response.
Yeah, but I mean, he does a very good job of kind of laying out the case about how all these kind of financial events are manufactured. And you can imagine that if you have a permanent backdoor that's available, if intelligence agencies have a permanent backdoor, there's this famous story about how the FBI wouldn't crack somebody's iPhone, but the Israelis would. And one of the guys who created RSA encryption, I think two of the guys who created RSA encryption were Israelis. So there's a lot of implications there. But bringing it back to BRICS, I think that it's just another dialectic. And if you start to look at all of these things as dialectics, it's really simple. There's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. They don't really want communism. They don't really want fascism. They want technocracy, but they're going to create a really loud communist movement and a really loud fascist movement, and then they're going to put them together, and hundreds of millions of people are going to die, and then people are going to beg for technocracy. I think that's what they want. And how do we get out of this, or what's next? I think ultimately, and again, I can be accused of oversimplifying this stuff, but the founding of the United States was based on the idea of individual liberty. And the technocracy or the oligarchy or whatever, however you want to frame it, they're based on central control. It's the complete opposite thing. And if you understand that what they're using is epistemological warfare, that is the knowledge of things, in order to control the behavior of people, then we have to take back individual sovereign control of our thinking. And if we can do that, if enough people can do that, and I think that that's what Jesus was talking about. That's why I think he's the Logos incarnate. I think that Logos means critical thinking. I'm critical thinking incarnate. I'm critical thinking and communication incarnate, meaning what you and I are doing right now is the way that we figure out how to do something about what they're doing. But unless we understand that what you and I are doing right now is what they don't want us to do, which obviously, if you're having a problem getting your bank account, if you're being deplatformed by all of these people, that's exactly what they're wanting to do. So my finger in the air would tell me that's what you need to do what they don't want you to do. What they don't want you to do is think.
You answered the question I was going to ask you. Besides enjoying the scenery on our collective train ride to the digital concentration camps, what can we do? Do you think, I guess one of the other questions, just this morning, right? Russia launches missiles into Ukraine. Your thought on this threat, this sort of Damocles that they're hanging over us of World War III and this propaganda. Do you think it's more, 1984, George Orwell, Oceania, East Asia sort of thing? Or do you think they have an intent to drop? I've seen three different scenarios. That this is just all propaganda to keep us scared. A second scenario where they drop a few mini tactical nukes, or the all-out nuclear war scenario, which I don't believe in the nuclear winter theory. I think we could maybe bounce back from all-out nuclear war. But your thoughts on this sort of paradigm that they're throwing at us?
Well, I like to posit this a lot, and again, this is something I hope is true, but I don't think thermonuclear weapons are real. I think nuclear weapons may be real, but I don't even think I don't even think they're real, and I think that that's part of the reason that they needed to have the Cold War. The idea that we would give the Russians, I mean, if you followed Anthony Sutton's work, or I think it's Major Jordan's diaries, the United States was clearly, and Great Britain, NATO was clearly providing the Russians with everything that they needed to make nuclear weapons. So, there's a few scenarios that could, understanding that, and then looking at things like mutually assured destruction theory, which came out of Rand. Okay, does Rand make anything except stories? Do they actually do anything except make stories up? I think maybe that's the secret of Rand, is that they actually just make up stories. But if you posit that nuclear weapons aren't actually even real, and that would be the reason that we gave Russia all of our secrets, then all of this is just kind of an elaborate school play, right? Because if nuclear wars were actually even a potential, do you think Putin would really invade Ukraine if he thought it might lead to a nuclear war? I can't imagine it. Does that mean that people won't get killed? No. But I think that clearly, if you go back to Mackinder, if you go back to that map that I showed, okay, as long as you can create chaos on the land bridge between Eurasia and Africa, and as long as you can keep either China fighting with Russia, or Europe fighting with Russia, or some combination thereof, then you'll be able to maintain your thalassocracy, and you'll be able to maintain control in the general direction of things. I don't think they have absolute control over things, and if they did, I probably would be black-pilled. I don't feel like I'm black-pilled, because I keep discovering things. Once I discovered the if then equals because, the cause effect complex equivalency, it is a magic filter that you can apply, and it's amazing, because ChatGPT actually is trained in sleight of mouth. So one of the things that you'll find on my Substack, if you go to the dukereport.substack.com are my scripts. And I think I've given the sleight of mouth one away for free because it's so simple. So ChatGPT understands how to argue against a cause-effect complex equivalency. And if you go to my Twitter feed and you just search for, I could probably share a screen and do it, if/then equals because, no spaces. Just search for that on Twitter. Just go into Twitter and search for that. You'll find all of these different places, mostly Council on Foreign Relations. Council on Foreign Relations loves this pattern. They love this cause-effect complex equivalency pattern for memeing reality out into the universe. And once you understand how to see it, once you understand how to see the cause-effect or how to see the complex equivalency, then you realize how weak their positions really are. And if we can wake up enough people to figure that stuff out, then I don't think that they're going to be able to control us. And that's what they're afraid of. And that, again, it goes back to Jesus, because I think that's what Jesus was saying. When you understand the Logos incarnate being Logos, not word, then a lot of the things that he's saying in the Gospels, the Gospels wind up becoming if culture are the values and the processes, then the values are the Sermon on the Mount, and the processes are the applications of Logos within the Gospels. So that's my thesis that I'm working on right now. And so as far as World War III is concerned, they will pull World War III if they think they can get away with it, but they have fallbacks. That's why they have pandemics. That's a fallback. They've got a cyber attack. If what I've told you about encryption is true, they could pull a cyber attack anytime they want. They could pull a Mr. Robot event where they literally zero out everybody's bank account in the world. And they blame it on hackers. They'll blame it on somebody in Iran. They'll blame it on somebody in North Korea. They need Iran. They need North Korea. Okay. They need the Taliban when the Taliban was the thing. They need Al-Qaeda. They need, if you take a look at the Mackinder map, every place in the world where there's some kind of uprising, okay, where we need to send troops in, there's always, always either a transportation corridor or there's energy that's available there, or it's something like that. And you can't ignore the correlations between these things. So as far as World War III is concerned, they'll do it if they can, but they've got contingencies. They've got fallback plans. And the only thing that we can really do about it, I think, is to work on ourselves. So I would advise people learn to recognize the cause-effect complex equivalency pattern. You don't have to learn anything else. If you can learn how to recognize that pattern, things will start to occur to you that never occurred to you before. End of sermon.
Just on the nuclear thing, I'm open to, I've heard that, people have talked about that in the independent media, that nukes don't exist. I'm open to that, but I lived in Kazakhstan for 3 years, and I lived near the Polygon, which is was the principal Soviet nuclear test site, where Stalin purportedly dropped the first nuke in 1949 until 1990. And I've visited at ground zero, right? It's an 18,000 square kilometer patch, and it's managed out of Kurchatov and some of the scientists. We went a few hours into the Polygon, and there's different sites, and I've seen they created mock subways and mock structures that were purportedly blown up, right? But I had 2 Geiger counters where I stood was radioactive. And so I'm just wondering, and then, what about this large infrastructure then that's managed, in the U.S. with the silos and the nuclear stuff and the nuclear power plants? Just any thought on that?
Again, people may think I'm crazy. I mean, if you look at the Trinity site, when they did the first nuclear explosion, the thing that held the bomb was as big as a cabin. It was like, it was a large structure. And so do I think that there is possibility that they got nuclear weapons going? Yeah, maybe they did. Could they get them small enough to fit in a B-29? Maybe. Okay. Could they fit it in the nose cone of a missile? I don't know. Can you put like 27 of them in there? MIRVs, is that what they were called? Uh, maybe. So do I think that nuclear explosions have never happened? I think there's probably a good possibility that they have happened. Have they been reduced in size to the point where you can put them into a delivery mechanism like a missile? I don't know the answer to that question. And as far as, so do I think that there were probably explosions there? Yeah, I think there were explosions. Could you do explosions with dirty bombs that wound up having the same?
Well, that was one of the things in the Polygon. I've got photos. We visited this giant mini lake that was created, and they told us that it was created with dynamite, not with nukes. That and this occasion that they tried to put enough dynamite sort of to simulate a nuke. So I mean that's a perfect example, I guess, of what you're talking about.
Right. And, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both ports. Did they put a ship full of dynamite in there and blow it up, have a B-29 fly over and drop a bomb, and at the same time they blow the ship up in the harbor? I don't know that happened. Okay, but there's, again, when you start to think critically, I'll jump to Butler, for example. There's a guy who follows me on my show who thinks that he's put together enough evidence to suggest that Trump had a blood pack under his hat. That's a very dark, that's dark MAGA. Like, that's way darker MAGA than anything Elon Musk could come up with. So in that scenario, there are people there that take out people in the audience, and Trump bends down, has the blood pack on his hat, rises up, puts his arm up, says, "Fight, fight, fight," and then is effectively guaranteed the presidency of the United States of America. Do I think that happened? I don't know. Do I think that it's possible that it could happen? I think it's possible. And I think that being unregistered to vote and taking myself out of that dialectic, that left, right, red, blue, Republican, Democrat dialectic, is what freed me to be able to do that. And if I couldn't, if I had voted for Donald Trump, I could never believe that that would happen. Okay. But seeing him as an actor and thinking about that whole thing as a school play where actual real people might have gotten killed, and then, I mean, the Corey Comparatori part of the story is very weird because he wasn't going to go, and then he was sitting someplace else, and then they moved him and they put him in a certain spot. The way that the Secret Service was moving people around behind Trump immediately before the shooting started. There's a lot of weird stuff that happened in Butler. And so I guess the answer to your question is, I don't know, but I'm open to any explanation that makes some kind of sense.
No, I'm with you on the last point. I've given up on voting, and that's sort of my thesis on what happened with Trump. So one more question, just going back, I'm just curious, because we've covered the waterfront, and I've gotten pretty much what I wanted out of you, big picture view. Just your thing with Max Keiser. I listened to him on RT for many years, and I'm just wondering if he's like earnest, or is he part of some project and this whole Bitcoin thing? What are your thoughts on Keiser and Bitcoin?
I love Max like my brother. Okay, I'll just start there. And his wife, Stacy, gave me the best compliment that anybody's ever given me. One of my favorite photographers in the world is a guy named David Bailey, and she called me the David Bailey of Santa Monica. So I have warm feelings for both of them. I love them both. That said, I was with Max when he invented the first cryptocurrency, the Hollywood dollar. So he was way ahead of everybody in 1997. And he sold that company, Hollywood Stock Exchange, which is the only thing on the internet that I ever built that more or less still exists today in the same form that it was launched in, which is called hsx.com. And it's a prediction market for Hollywood movies. What do I think about Max? He is a Bitcoin true believer. And he may be, look, he bought Bitcoin. He was into cryptocurrencies in 1997. He invented the first one. So it's no surprise to me that he bought a zillion Bitcoins when it was worth nothing, which makes him one of the wealthiest people in the world, digitally. And his maintenance of that status is completely dependent on people maintaining their belief in Bitcoin. So is it a religious belief? I believe it's a religious belief. And I believe if you take it back to the three things that I said that the oligarchy needs to control, calling out of the primordial ooze from the the antediluvian, I don't know which word to use, out of the mud from the flood, from the biblical flood, that you need to do epistemological warfare, you need to be control of finance, and you need to have a monopoly on violence. And the finance part of that, there's a lot of weird stuff. I know that Catherine Austin Fitz just recommended a book by Ver.
Roger Ver. Yeah, I just bought it yesterday on Kindle.
Roger Ver, because I guess he's in jail now. That's always a tell to me that maybe you're onto something. Although I think I look at somebody like Marty Armstrong and I have big questions about Socrates and the secret sauce that he claims that he's got.
I've had him on the podcast, and I've had people tell me that they question his Socrates thing. But with the Bitcoin, like for me, the big question is, because Roger Ver talks about hijacking Bitcoin, how it's been hijacked. Others say, my thesis from the beginning, that it was created by them, by the globalists. That's been my thesis from the beginning. So for me, the question is now, do you think it'll succeed to go on to become the core of this new CBDC digital system, or they'll pull the rug on Bitcoin? Just any thought on that?
I think it all depends. Again, when I saw the red cap a couple of days ago in El Salvador, and then I saw Ginger Gates posting pictures of El Salvadorian cookies with the red caps on them, then again, all of that stuff starts to tip me into the conspiracy side of things. But I don't think that the oligarchy, and I learned this, the first time that I experienced it was working with people who are Disney Imagineers. Walt Disney was famous for having multiple teams work on the same project at the same time and compete against each other within the framework of Imagineering. Okay, who could come up with the best roller coaster? He'd have team A, team B, team C. They'd all pitch things. And this comes out of cartooning, because when you are doing a feature cartoon, you cast each character. And so you have 50 guys in the room who draw. Okay, who wants to draw Snow White? What, you think you can draw Snow White? Tell me what Snow White looks like. And you have 50 different people who are drawing Snow White. And then they come in, and then Walt picks and goes, okay, you're the winner. You're the Snow White artist. You're the Bambi artist. You're the Ariel artist. Okay. And then everybody else goes back into the cartoon room, and then they work for the guy who won the competition. I think that Walt Disney didn't make that up. I think that this is part of the culture of these big Apple computer probably works exactly the same way. Okay. Which is that you put competing teams against each other, and you expect that one of your smart teams is going to come up with the right solution. So you got CBDC, you've got Bitcoin, you've got stable coins, you've got Dogecoin, you've got the guys over in the back room that are doing gold. Why do people believe in gold? Because the Rothschilds told you to. So I think that it's a portfolio strategy, and that they've got a bunch of different technologies, and the one that winds up presenting itself as the winner is the one that they were going to go with. I mean, Mark Cuban became a made man when somebody gave him billions of dollars for a domain name, broadcast.com. Like, whatever happened to broadcast.com? That was just a money transfer. Palmer Luckey gives $10,000 to two guys who are making Trump memes, and Facebook thinks that it's in Facebook's best interest to send him out the door, cash him out of his stock with $1 billion. And he turns around and starts a military defense company. Like, that's a refunneling of money, right? That's just taking, well, we've got too much money in the Facebook bank, so we have to move it over here so that we can create the Andrew bank. We'll make up this story, we'll give it to Palmer. Palmer will go over, he'll start this company, it'll all be good. Okay. Bitcoin is the same thing. They've got chips on different parts of the roulette board, and they'll go with the one that solves the problem the best way, and they'll let them compete against each other.
Makes perfect sense. Where do people go? I'm subscribed to your stuff. Where do people go? All the links are in the description, but let us know how
the easiest place to go is thedukereport.com, which is how I started. My wife got kicked out. I met my wife on the steps of the Capitol on January 6th. She lost her Twitter account because she had Stop the Steal as a hashtag on her bio. So I built a website because she didn't know how to keep track of anything. And so I built a feed aggregator. And that's the Duke Report. Then I started doing research, and I started adding all of the books that I've discovered, and I'm way behind. I'm like 300 books behind on the book section. But if you want to find books on where you can figure out the stuff that you talk about on this show, you can go to thedukereport.com/books, and the Duke Report has links to my Substack, which is where I'm doing the best stuff that I'm publishing right now. The Duke Report is a news aggregator. So if you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world right now, and you're being siloed in Twitter, or you're being siloed in Facebook, or you're just tired of all the MAGA libtard bullshit, you can go to thedukereport.com. It's a feed aggregator, and you can just find evidence-based journalism. That's all that's there. You can buy my book. I wrote a book. I took the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and I removed all of the cultural references out of it, and it's a fascinating read. I published that as Stealth Power and the Illusion of Democracy. Spoiler, it's not in the book, but I think that the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion were probably written by British intelligence, and then they, as a counterintelligence play, they fed them to the Russian Secret Service. And subscribe to the Duke Report on Substack, thedukereport.substack.com. That's the best way to support me.
All right, very cool. I see on the Duke Report, one of my latest podcast with Matthew Crawford and Gabe is listed there. So thank you, Peter, for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you, yay.
I'm going to go just with yay.
Yay. Thank you, yay.